The Sunday morning Joe and Joe weather show where the weather is quiet in the east. We've got winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings in the plains and northern Rockies, and the never ending winter storm warnings out in the west. We're going to talk about the week ahead. We've got a clipper system. Haven't seen one of those in a long, long time. And of course, we have a ton of model volatility in the long range, and we will discuss that momentarily. Brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware. Where else but at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, in southwest Suffolk County on Long Island, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area. They've got mulch, they've got topsoil, they've got sand, and they've got salt just in case there's another winter storm before the winter's all said and done. So head over to Omni. 6317-561-1125 is the telephone number for the best prices in town. The website is
OmniTrueValue.com. Joe, what news? A Clipper system. I thought Clipper systems were extinct.
Well, they certainly have been over the last 20 or so years. Yeah, in all seriousness, actually, it's funny because somebody put somebody that we mutually, when I say mutually, I mean me and the other person, follow each other on Twitter. Steve O is what he goes by, and he was talking about the Clipper system and the fact that there haven't been many of those in the last 20 or so years, and I just responded by pointing out that it's in the same cycle that we've seen many more in the way of these big storms and these big weather events, and very few of these clipper systems. So I guess this now kind of goes down in that category of very few, because we do have one for Monday night into Tuesday.
But I should point out that this is not the classical Alberta Clipper.
No, it's not.
It's not the classical Saskatchewan Screamer, nor is it a classical Manitoba Mauler, as our
you're running through all the cliched names. This one's actually. Right. This one is actually you saw on the map at the start of the show. There's these winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings across the northern plains and northern Rockies. That's actually coming from there, and moving to the Great Lakes, and then taking the slide southeastward because of the Atlantic storms that are out there. Yeah, it's all blocked up. And speaking of which, we were talking about this late last week, where I warned everybody to expect a lot of model volatility going forward, particularly in the long range, and we've been seeing that. I think all the models are having a difficult time handling what's going to happen down the road. And when I say down the road, it's in the not too distant down the road either, because we saw some of that model volatility last night, where all three models went in all three directions, and that includes the European that buries eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England beyond recognition next Saturday into early Sunday. So
right,
yeah, this is going to be a tough couple of weeks. Whenever you get into these blocking patterns, it makes for really difficult forecasts, particularly in that mid-range phase, because you just don't. There's too many weather systems running around, and as you've pointed out many times, it's the one ahead of it will impact the one behind it, and that's not just the one ahead of it this time that has the one behind it, but you have to look at systems that are to the north and to the northeast and to the northwest, and they're all just sort of making these wheels turn and change size. It's going to be a tough forecasting stretch, I think, for us, certainly, because we take it so seriously.
Oh, no question about it. No question about the fact that, and you're absolutely right. As we've said before, if you have a system that's heading for the Pacific coast, and that is the system that is being suggested will hammer away at you 5 days down the road, fine and well and good. But if you have two systems ahead of it, or even just one system ahead of it, that could play a big role in changing the script, so to speak, as to where that system on the Pacific coast eventually is going to go. So it's, as I said, it's a chess game. It's a chess game between the various short-term computer model guidance and the atmosphere itself. The model guidance says, oh, there's a system heading for the western United States, the Pacific coast. I think, in using all the algorithms that it is basing this on and mathematical equations, I think that next Friday, that storm is going to be along the eastern seaboard and ramming New England with a heavy snowfall. That's what the models are saying. And then the atmosphere says, oh, checkmate. The system that's along the eastern seaboard now is going to serve as a block and push that system out away from New England and the Northeast, and you're not going to get a darn thing. And the atmosphere, of course, is always the one that comes up and says, checkmate.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, I think you're right. I think it's the blocking. I think it's all about the blocking. Yep. How much of that blocking holds or doesn't hold? Is it in an ideal spot to force a storm to develop and impact the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, or is it going to pull? Is it going to, which is what the Europeans suggest? Is it going to be where the block kind of shifts eastward, which is what the GFS does, and has a more west to east system coming with more emphasis on the northern part of that system rather than the southern part? Then you have the Canadian and the ICON models, which were much more suppressive and kind of implying that the blocking might be too strong and that you'd have a much weaker system going, moving along in a bit more to the south that really doesn't amount to very much. Yeah, it's going to be a struggle to figure this out. Good morning, everybody on the chat board. Welcome to the Sunday Morning Joe and Joe Weather Show. Good morning to those of you who are not on the chat board and are lurking in the background. You can catch the Joe and Joe Weather Show almost every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And during the week, we are on Monday through Thursday at 7:35 p.m. Fridays and Saturdays, we're usually off. But if the Europeans right, we won't be this week. So hit the subscribe button with your Gmail account. Use your turn on your notifications, and you'll never miss us. Ken Musillo hitting super chat this morning. Thank you, Ken. Most appreciated as always. And Paul Roman hit super chat before the show started. So thank you, Paul. And Joe Rayo, of course, will be monitoring the chat board for questions, comments, and super chat hits or whatever you have. I also, by the way, I pinned, if any of those of you who are interested in my subscription website where you can not only see extra videos, but also get some handwritten posts to talk about the weather going forward. The link is up there, pinned to the top of the chat board, and it's not expensive either. It won't kill you.
It won't break you.
Right. Trish Sparaccio hitting a super chat just now. Happy Sunday to you too. So I guess we should get started, shall we?
Surely.
So let's get going. By the way, I don't have a rant for today, so I was trying to think of something to complain about, but I really don't have anything. So anyhow, although if you want to put on the list, I was watching one of the Atlanta stations reminding me if I was going to church today, if I was going fishing today, if I was walking my dog today, that I need to wear a coat this morning, but I won't need it if it's this afternoon. So we got our fashion forecast there.
Yes.
On how to dress. So here we go. Looking at what is very quiet up and down the eastern seaboard. There were no watches or warnings other than this looks like some dense fog advisories from earlier today that were in South Florida. I should update this just real quick to make sure that they're still there. And they are not. So all the dense fog advisories are gone. Winter storm warnings for southern North Dakota and northern South Dakota. I got that right. Advisories in an east-west band on either side of that, and that's where the system from Monday night into Tuesday is coming from. Winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories in the northern Rockies. And Joe, one of these days, although not today. We will have one of these days at some point where there won't be winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories up in California because it just doesn't stop there. It's that kind of a winter where snow begets snow and the trough's been in the west and it just goes on and on.
It does. It doesn't seem that it has an end, but it will come to an end. Maybe in May, God knows, maybe in June, it will come to an end eventually.
Bogies Bees, Joe. Bogies Bees hitting super chat. Thank you, Bogies Bees. Okay, so we got this all done. So let's square away with the satellite. And some clouds. There's a little system that's moving out of Lake Huron and moving through upstate New York and into New England with clouds. But they have thinned out in southern New England and points southward. And of course, we've got an absolutely spectacular day here in northeast Georgia. Beautiful blue skies and sunshine, down to 37 this morning. Last I checked before the show started, we were up to 58. So temperatures moving along quite nicely, and I don't think I'll see a cloud for the rest of the day. In fact, anybody in the mid-Atlantic, the southeast, across the Gulf states, has a cloud-free, beautiful Sunday. And then you go to the north from there and look up in Nebraska and South Dakota. You can see the cloud structure there, kind of indicating that there's a shortwave trough moving through, producing what it is producing up in that part of the world. And we are seeing that system moving eastward. And of course, if you look further west, the hook that's off of the coast of Northern California has come into southern Oregon, and that is the next troublemaker for the western western part of the United States, but particularly for California and the coastal ranges of California into Oregon. Just like you said, Joe, doesn't stop there. It's every pattern locks into every winter locks into a pattern that lasts for a long, long time. This one has played out where it locked in right around Christmas time in the western part of the United States, and it has just been utterly unrelenting. Utterly unrelenting.
It's like that. An analogy is like that, and those of you of a certain age may remember back in the 60s, there was a Saturday morning game show for kids called Just for Fun with Sonny Fox. And the show started with two people at a desk and two giant treasure chests. And the theme was there was like a pile of keys. There may be like several hundred keys. And the two people at the table with the chests were going through all the keys, desperately trying to find the one that would open the lock on their treasure chest, and so you can open them. And the first one who did it got a ton of toys. And this pattern is similar to that. We got locked in. The treasure chest got locked in December, Joe. And we have been going day after day, week after week, looking for the key to open up, to break this pattern. And we are still yet to find it. That chest will open someday. We will find the key. We will open the lock. But whether it comes at the end of this week, and by the way, our friend Janet Dunn on the chat board saying still too soon for next weekend's event, but you can follow. And Joe, she says we can follow Mrs. Ann Sambles until midweek, and then look. Well, she doesn't say that. I say that. She says, in a stoic way, you can follow the ensembles and then till midweek, and then look at the operationals. Yes. Mrs. Ann Sambles will play a role in this too, and I'm sure when we talk later about the long range in depth, we'll maybe even take a look at what the Ann Sambles are saying.
Oh, I think we should. One of the things, just in terms of just describing the model volatility, the operationals, particularly once you get past out the fifth day and beyond, the operationals and the ensembles have really diverged. And the further out you go, the more divergent they get. As if you looked at the ensembles, you would kind of come to the conclusion that it could be, it could be very interesting over the next couple of weeks. And yet, if you look at the operational, you would come to perhaps depending on which run you look at, you would come to a different conclusion. In fact, there was one run yesterday that dropped the trough in the west on the GFS on the operational and just left it there and just kept trying to pop bridges up in the East, and yet you look at the ensembles, and particularly the European ensemble, and you would say no, that this is not going to be the case. So, well, again, we'll have to see on how that plays. Radar wise, here's some of that. It's very a lot of this what you see in upstate New York and in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. It's all not reaching the ground. Most of it's not even reaching the ground, or if it is, it's very, very light. And then meanwhile, in the areas that we have the winter storm warnings with this trough, that the shortwave trough and low that's in the northern plains, producing a rather expansive area of snow from uh, south, up into south, probably a little bit more in the way of rain further south, but right on the edge. But it's probably mostly snow in that whole band that runs up from northeast Iowa on up into North Dakota. Then, of course, here we go. Huge area of precip going on now, pounding the Sierra Nevadas with heavy snow there. Also, a rather impressive looking area of precip up in northern California and up through Oregon. And we've got precip up. This is all snow, of course, in the northern Rockies to go along with some of the winter weather advisories that are up over there. So let's adventure over to WPC, where one of the things with this Clipper system, it seems, is that if it were to hold its own, if it were to hold its own, I probably would be fairly, a little more bullish with the idea of maybe some accumulating snow Monday night and Tuesday. But it is actually going to forecast to weaken when it heads towards the coast, because it's going to run into this the Friday Saturday system, which is south of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. There's just no room for it to blossom out or even just to stay together. So the probabilities here, as far as the probability for at least 2 inches, not really showing very much. Yeah, you got some in southwestern New York and up in north central New York and northeastern New York, northern Vermont, New Hampshire, but no, it's not really doing anything. But meanwhile, what you see here in South Dakota, North Dakota, and back up into Wisconsin, that's going on right now. So that's a front-end loaded probability of at least 2. And then on the West Coast, although the mountains in Southern California are not involved here, but the Sierra Nevadas are, the ranges inland of the coast in Northern California are involved in that, as well as Southern Oregon. And on the long range, so this was before last night's European uh, vision, let's call it a vision, of what the European says is going to happen. So we'll be curious to see if, when WPC updates this map, probably in about an hour or so, how much of that they took seriously. We've got the 10 to 30% running from West Virginia, actually from Western Virginia, northeastward, north and west of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, north and west of New York City and Philadelphia. Boston is in the 10 to 30, 30 to 50, well north and west in upstate New York and northern Pennsylvania, also in the Catskills, Berkshires. Kind of looks like, Joe, that at least the way they drew this almost looks like the last 2 systems in a sense that have moved on through. But again, this is before they saw the European last night. And WPC, having watched these long-range maps all winter long, they seem to put a lot of stock in what the European does. And I don't know that that's necessarily a wise thing, considering how that model has performed this winter.
Again, I'm tired of continuing to say it. 5 and 6 days out, still lots of time, still lots of wiggle room. We'll see how this all pans out. But for the moment, at least, it's fun to speculate, but we'll see how much all of this changes as we get toward the latter part of this week. And yes, Joe, maybe we might just do a Friday show if we take at face value what the models are suggesting now, especially the European. Yeah, we'll be on Friday, but then again, maybe not.
All right, why don't we start with, well, before we even get there, we've got this little system for Monday night into Tuesday, and what's
and the thing about this little system, and the fact that you were calling it a clipper. I mean, Renato last night said, what exactly is what they're talking about for Monday night and Tuesday. And I didn't say it was a clipper in the classical sense because it's not dropping down out of the western part of North America and down into the nation's midsection and then to our south. This, as I was explaining, it's like an old front that is developing a little wave of low pressure on it out over the nation's midsection or out over toward the plains, and it's going to ripple. It will ripple right along that front. But again, as it approaches the eastern United States, it then will come under the influence of the block that's located up over Atlantic Canada. And whether or not the block will be enough to force that system well off to our south and not have any influence on us at all, well, that's yet to be seen. I will say that I just took a peek at the 12Z Foos run. And sadly to say, ladies and gentlemen, this will be the last time that I will be able to say on a Sunday that I just looked at the 12Z North American Foos run, because come next, well, actually, no. Next week it'll be coming out at 10:30. So yeah, so it will not be the last time. It will be out by 11 o'clock. But again, just a reminder that next week we go under that atrocious rule, which we all know and hate, and as daylight saving time, which means all of our weather information is going to come out an hour later. But the Foos, Joe, suggests that by Tuesday morning, 0.13 inches of liquid precipitation at LaGuardia Airport with a thickness of 542 and a T1 of 0, which suggests that maybe, just maybe, at least in New York, there may be a little touch of snow to deal with, or snow and sleet, or wet snow, or something early on Tuesday from that system out west.
Yeah, you're going to have to you're going to have to analyze the foos on the fly because you'll have to do it while the show's on the air.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Well,
so I've got the 500 up, the upper air, so we could figure this all out with this clipper, and I'm actually showing you yesterday's, where in red I've drawn in where these short waves are, and if you look off the west coast, all the blue below normal heights, okay, is out in the west, where it's been most of just about nonstop for the last 100 days, except for those whenever we got those when we got that interruption with the bitter cold blast, whatever it was back in February, and also the one in December. So there's the upper low that's off the coast of Oregon, the current storm that we pointed out that's on the satellite. So I'm going to just get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of the troughs. But look at the system out in the west. You're going to see a little piece there, that little indentation that shows up this morning from Idaho down into Utah and western Colorado. So that is the shortwave that is producing a lot of the snows that you saw on the radar back up into the northern plains and in the northern Rockies. We don't have from the classic standpoint of the typical clipper system, you'd have a long jet coming out of Canada, dropping down into the eastern United States, and we don't have that. It's more of a west to east type of flow. Well, that shortwave is start to see the kink there by the time we get to tonight, and then on Monday it's in the western lakes. It's right up here. Okay, so so this system actually does something like this. Okay, and then also if you look on the right, you could see the western side of what is the Atlantic storm, an Atlantic storm south of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland that really isn't going to go anywhere. So this thing has no place to, it can't go northeast because there's an upper high. The bottom part of an upper high is pushing from Labrador into southeastern Canada. So it can't go there. The only thing it can do is kind of go southeast. And the storm that's out to the east leaves very little room for that shortwave. And you'll notice it kind of loses its definition by the time we get to Tuesday morning, and it actually starts to become more a part of the offshore system than thriving on its own and trying to develop into something completely separate. And that's why this system's not going to really do very much, and it is going to be weak. We have marginal cold air, so that is what it is, I suppose, to use an overused cliche.
Right.
And there you go. So this is the NAM model that I showed, and I don't think that really matters which one I pick because we're not talking about a whole lot here. But if you look
And I might point out also, for all of you who are hanging your hat on a big storm for next weekend using the zero Z European, you say, "Oh yeah, well, that shows a big thing." I might also point out that the same zero Z European took the moisture with this impending system Monday night and Tuesday and slid it off to the south.
Right,
So
and kept it weak. It made it weaker faster as well,
right,
and further south. And you see even
right,
on the NAM. I mean, there's a low that comes out here. If you look at the radar profile of the NAM, it's got a low there that it puts in central Kansas, and you've got these east winds from Minnesota west across the Dakotas into Montana. So there's some upslope going on, especially as you get into Montana and beyond. So yeah, it just kind of moseys along there, and here we are on Monday. We've got that arc of snow over northern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and then it just kind of dives southeastward. It loses tries to maintain a little identity, and suddenly you've got just what is a narrow band of like a stick of snow from Buffalo to about New York City on the southern edge on the NAM, and then it just goes out. You see the low there, tries to develop a little bit when it's well offshore, but it really becomes more a part of that big system that's out to the east. And yeah, I guess if you want to make the assumption that system holds on, maybe somebody winds up with a coating to an inch or so out of it. If you want to be a little bit bullish, you might want to say a coating or a little bit safe in case there's some sort of surprise someplace, which could happen. You might say a coating for an inch or two, but it ain't going to be anything beyond that, I don't think.
right, right. Yeah, it's real. All right. So those of you who are looking toward the end of the week or whatever, to consider this to be the opening, the preliminary event, if you will. You know, the minor event before the big event that everybody has come to see, if indeed there's much of an event to talk about at all. It doesn't really look like. I mean, to me, Joe, the classic type of clipper, which dives on down from Canada, passes off to the south of our area, and then once it gets its feet wetted, it suddenly blows up, and you get a quick 5 or 6 inches. That's not what this is looking like. This looks like something that is kind of like meandering along, going to the south, and then being pushed more to the south. If we're kind of like on the northern periphery of action, if there is any action to be had tomorrow night and into Tuesday morning.
Right. Now, in the West, as we want to just want to go back to the upper air in the West, that the upper features there are still hanging on off the West Coast. And if you look on the last few frames here of the NAM, now this is along about Tuesday, you start to see what looks like something a little more important trying to break away. So that is probably the system that eventually makes it to the east later on next week. But at least the NAM standpoint only takes us to Wednesday evening. And backing up here on this, I want to get a little bit back to today. There we go. But you can follow along with what's going on in California. There's your Sierra Nevada snow today, which continues through into the afternoon and then starts to slowly weaken as energy moves east, but still seeing little waves of moisture coming in off the coast. And then late in the period, you get what looks like that stronger system, and suddenly you got this low that pops up in Colorado along about Wednesday evening. So from here, we will switch to let's switch to the GFS. Actually, let's do this. Let's go to the European. Everybody's talking about the European. We might as well spend a little time with the European.
Oh no! Why should we?
Right. So, hold on. I want to go back. This, by the way, is a reminder on Tropical Tidbits. The European does not have. He does not have a precip type. This is just how much precip is going to fall. So it's all in green. So it doesn't tell you whether it's rain or snow. You'll just have to figure that out on your own, essentially. So the overnight, since this is the 6Z run, which only goes out 90 hours, but just to show you what it does with the clipper, it's a little further south. Uh, Actually, it's a little further south and just maybe a shade more robust with the precip amounts, but not by much. Maybe a couple of tenths that it produces in a few places, and then it just goes out and, as I said, just basically gets absorbed by the coastal low, and then we've got enough of that next big high in Canada kind of builds down the eastern seaboard, which is what you like to see. Um, I will say, Joe, before I make the switch to the 0Z run, that uh, at least from the standpoint of what you're looking at in the plains, in terms of how the isobars are structured, doesn't seem like the isobars are pointing to pressures lowering toward the western Great Lakes. So that might be a good sign for the snow lovers for Saturday. But here's what it did on the surface. And you see the high. Now we're into Thursday, and you see the high is actually north of Lake Superior, so you can't actually see where the H is, but the pressures there are all 1040 or higher, and you start to bring out a low because of that high just holding on. It has a low there, a 1013 low in eastern Kentucky, which is the primary. It kind of meanders its way into western Pennsylvania and dies out. Secondary low forms along the North Carolina coast. Seems to be enough of that high and colder air trying to wedge in to eastern Pennsylvania, down into Virginia, into Washington D.C., Baltimore, and Virginia, and suddenly the secondary is a 92 low south and east of New Jersey, and then it just explodes into the 980s and a 979 low because it goes nuts with the upper air and makes like 5 or 6 contours here cut off. And you can see the upper air energy. Instead of lifting to the Great Lakes, Joe, the upper air energy on the European drops southeastward. And that's because, and this is going to be important, this is going to be very important. Look up near Nova Scotia. There is an east-west trough here, okay? See that right there? There's an east-west trough that is swinging around. There's another arm that's coming around this ocean system and dropping southeastward. That delays that system offshore from pulling out. And that means that this system, the new one, can't really go up to the northeast. So it drives it east and southeast. All right, that's I think that's the primary difference between the two models from the overnight. And you see how the European just really amplifies this upper low in a big way. But it's got, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 closed at Pittsburgh, and then it becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 closed south and east of New Jersey, east of the Delaware coast. So
as amazing as that looks, though, remember again, we're looking 5, 6 days out, and how many times have we seen something so dynamic suddenly become not so dynamic over time? It'd be wonderful. In fact, the only case I could remember where something started out tremendous, like 8 and 10 days out, and just continued to remain that way all the way to the very day that the event began, was this. A few people have already mentioned it on the chat board, the superstorm of March 1993.
Yeah.
Which we were praising to the high hilt, the way the long range model was saying this had it, this caught on to this 8 days, 10 days ago, and wow, what amazing! But how many times since have we seen similar cases where it just doesn't, if it doesn't end up as intense and dynamic as it was being suggested, many days before, it goes on a different track or a different path. That's why you have to be careful. This looks interesting. Also, Joe, did you have a chance, or I don't think so, did you have a look at thermodynamics? Because I think that according to thermodynamics, at the 2-meter level, the temperatures, at least in the immediate tri-state area, are marginal, to say the least.
This is a time of year where most of the time, if it's going to happen, you're going to have marginal. You're going to have to.
You're going to need that thing to really rev up, to create a situation where it becomes so dynamic that it steps the mild air and creates its own zone of cold air, which would then lead to snow instead of rain.
Right, but to be fair, the event from earlier this week, we had very little low-level cold air and marginal conditions, and we still managed to pull it off because
Right.
you had some of that dynamic cooling. Now I'm noticing a couple of things. I went back to last night's 0Z run on the GFS. Uh, so if you look off near Nova Scotia, there's a closed low there, and you can see the energy that's out in the west. And that upper low on Wednesday, it's actually faster than the European, or was faster than the European, where it swung that upper low southeastward into the Atlantic, popping up the ridge. If you look here, if you look, what happens is the purple area up to the north near Hudson Bay is the block doing its thing. And it actually retreats that because you've got this diving cutoff from Nova Scotia that pops up the ridge. There's your upper low in Colorado. And of course, now suddenly, because you don't have enough of blocking in the right place, that upper low wound up going northeastward up into Minnesota and then swinging eastward from there. Okay. Well, now let's look at that was the overnight GFS. Now let's look at the new GFS upper air, which is the 12Z run. We have enough of it here. So this is Monday morning. You're going to see you're going to see this upper low drop southeast. This is Monday morning. We have to get to Wednesday. You see the purple there building up near
Right.
Hudson Bay and points north. So that's the block. Come Tuesday night, the GFS has, instead of showing something coming down and cutting off, has an east-west trough, almost like a Norland-looking trough dropping southward. So that goes out. And then it's got it didn't have this on the early run. If you look on Thursday, you see see the extension that goes from just south of Newfoundland west to New Brunswick. There's a short wave, and it amplifies actually as it goes to the Gulf of Maine by the time we
Right.
get to Thursday evening. That amplifies. So let's see what that does. So now the block to the north is not exactly retreating. So let's see what it does to the system in the west. So you got this upper low in Iowa. And now, instead of trying to go lift up into Canada, it does try to show the energy from the upper low. And suddenly you've got a cutoff, not like the European, not nearly as vigorous, early Sunday morning, east of New Jersey, south of Long Island. And then that goes its merry way onto the east. So the GFS seems to have changed a bit from the no chance on the upper air. I'm less concerned about whatever it's going to show on the surface, which I'm looking at for the first time. But let's take a look and see what kind of adventure it takes us on today's run. So first, the Clipper system. There's your low. There's your Clipper. It's got that dark blue snow early Tuesday morning across Pennsylvania, but then it weakens it somewhat, but it's showing some measurable snow into the morning, and then that goes away. Turns colder, turns dry. Now we start to get to Thursday. It's still mostly dry. So this is a little different. See, it still tries to take a primary there. It's got the low in eastern Iowa, and holds on to suddenly it's a 98 low, and then all of a sudden it pops up a low well east of the Delaware coast. You see it there, and you get a little bit of snow on Long Island, southern New England, and New Jersey. So it's kind of trying. It's not quite there yet, but it's not taking an entire system northeastward into southern Canada. So I think the GFS has opened the door to slightly on today's run. It's opened the door slightly with more changes coming. Because remember, we're still at 144 hours and beyond here with regards to what it's doing. But now we're going to have to see what today's European does if it holds on to what it has. And we might as well. Let's see if we get any clues from the icon, because the icon likes to do what the European does. So,
right, exactly.
All right, so while this is all loading, let me just say, we've got a super chat hit. If you would take care of that.
Well, the total run so far is Paul Roman, and I may have missed anyone that came up before Paul, but so far we have Paul Roman, Ken Musillo, Trish Sparaccio, Bogies Bees, Robert Russo, and David Schwartz is the most recent. David is talking about climatologically what the temperature is in the month of March, how it rises, and how it may actually serve to perhaps preclude sticking of snow. But those are the people who have been kind enough to hit super chat so far. And Bogies Bees, I wonder what is it? What is that thing that you go into an apothecary and what is it? Ben's Bees. You ever see that product, Joe, where the guy has
No.
created something? I don't know. I'm thinking of a product that ends in bees. Anyway, sweetheart, Bogies Bees. He's on with all the others today. Thank you very much.
By the way, the icon has, kind of looks like the European in terms of track, but it doesn't. It's not quite as amplified uh, as the
Burt's
European.
Bees.
Burt's
Burt's
Bees.
Bees. Thank you, Janet. Janet Dunn.
But
Yeah.
yeah, you can see the icon has the Europeans look, just not as not nearly as deep and not nearly as amplified as it goes out. Then it's got something else right behind it coming out of the Gulf states and moving northeast for the end of the week. I'm sorry, for the early part of next week. And you've got I'm looking at higher than normal pressures in Labrador, kind of trying to push down. So it's the surface isn't too shabby, but
See, I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired of these systems that we've seen so far this winter season, where we're relying on a primary crossing through the Great Lakes and a secondary popping up somewhere. There's the problem. The problem is trying to figure out A, where the secondary is going to develop exactly relative to the coastal plain, and B, how strong will the secondary become once it gets its feet wet out over the Gulf Stream. And these are problems that the models 4 or 5 days out just cannot put their finger on exactly, and leaves us sitting here saying, well, it could do this, it could do that, maybe it'll do this. Will there ever come a time, Joe, for the rest of our lifetime,
no.
where we see a big high building in from the Great Lakes and a storm starting in the Western Gulf and moving up along the coast, and we're able to follow it step by step, interacting with that cold air? That's what I want to see. I'm getting tired of these primaries going to the west and lateraling its energy to another system, and we're trying to figure out where. And the other problem is when you have that is, will we end up in the so-called screw zone, so to speak, where sometimes the primary laterals to the secondary, and you end up in between the two and get absolutely nothing.
Your
I'm getting
Sunday,
tired of this.
your Sunday morning rant is the Sunday rant is brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware, 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon.
Yes.
Raymond O'Hara hitting super chat. Thank you, Raymond, and Jason Kaplan hitting super chat for this Sunday. Thank you both, and Robert Russo. I know Joe mentioned it, but I want to mention it too. Robert Russo hitting super chat. Didn't get to him before. I'm looking at the Canadian, which is completely the Canadian. As we're still in this, Joe, the Canadian is just completely in a different place.
Right.
The Canadian just takes forever to bring this energy out from the west. And when it does, it takes it up into northern Minnesota and north of Lake Superior, and then has second energy that comes out because the whole trough then shifts eastward. So what it does on the surface is you almost completely get next to nothing from the system for Saturday. I mean, it just falls apart. Look, you got the low dies out in Wisconsin. There's no secondary development at all because it's got second energy that's coming in behind it. You got this low down in Oklahoma and Texas. And what does that do? It goes up the west side of the Appalachians and intensifies. It goes up the St. Lawrence Valley for Sunday night into Monday. So it's got a whole different worldview. So
Right.
you know what the bottom line is? The bottom
No.
line. Oh, we got to look at Mrs. Ann Sample. I forgot.
That's right.
The bottom line is this is not something we're going to have. This is not something we're going to resolve today. And I think that's pretty fair to say. And Samples is only out to 132 hours, where we have a low cutting off near Minnesota on its 500. So it's actually not out far enough. And of course, it's not really too important with regards to the Clipper, other than to show you, if you look at the dark blue area over the northeast, that that represents the short wave from the Clipper, and it just kind of, you know, it's just a weak system. Again, it's not going to amount to much. This a system like that in a winter where you were getting snow after snow. This would be a system that you would have to watch really closely, because if you're in a winter where everything, surprises to the upside, yeah, okay. But I've taken the policy this winter that nothing will surprise to the upside, and so far that's been a pretty good policy to hold on to. And yeah, it doesn't go out far enough. Joe only had to 32 hours. So I think what I'll do is I'll bring up the 6Z and see what that one did. And not as vigorous in Minnesota with the cutoff in Minnesota. Well, you know what? It's hard to tell. So it gets as you get further out in time with the ensembles, it gets less and less defined and more broad. I mean, it does have a nice looking trough in the eastern part of the United States with this, but that doesn't really tell you too much when you need to know where does it form a low, where's the where if there's a cutoff in there, it may not be picked up by the ensembles out 200 hours ahead of time. So we don't get it. We're not seeming to get any. She's not helpful today, Joe. She's not being helpful.
Maybe you should ask. Maybe you should ask Mrs. Bundy.
Poor dear Mrs. Bundy, bless her heart. Let's see, what is she? She's always, just so everybody knows, Mrs. Bundy is always lurking behind the show. She's always there. Okay.
You see, things like Mrs. Bundy, draw the line between your typical. There are many other weather shows on the net. There she is. There's Mrs. Bundy. And this is the thing that separates us from all the other weather shows. They don't.
You know what? I should hold on just a second, because I did say surprise. Did I not?
Yes, you did.
So give me just a second here. Go finish your thought.
No, I'm just saying that, doing things like with Mrs. Bundy and Briller Jeopardy, this separates us from the other. You can go on Facebook or you can go on YouTube and you could see many other weather shows where the people or the person is just talking straight weather. But we know that from time to time during the course of an hour or so, you need a little something to giggle at. And this is our way of injecting a little bit of levity into the entire affair here.
Yes, I agree, but I think you're going to like this.
What, you just bring up Uncle Arthur?
I'm trying to find a picture that will match. Hold on.
Right.
Because then we could have him. By the way, just to be clear, Joe and I, especially me, okay, because I actually met Paul Lynde years ago when I worked on the Today Show, and that was going back, way back. What a talent that man was. I mean, really, he was incredible. He did a lot of Broadway shows. He was an incredible talent. Very, very funny. And one great ad-libber. Oh, I should have changed the screen. I didn't want you guys to see what I was doing. All right, anyway. I'm trying to do something here. Let me get Joe back up on the screen so we can spend some quality time with Mrs. Bundy here.
Is that the only picture that we have of Mrs. Bundy? I mean, there must be others.
I'm sure there are others, but that's the only one I found. I think we've got a major league super chat hit that you might want to take care of there.
Oh my goodness, is that who I think it is? I'm running slow on the chat board, so things are running a little behind.
Okay, so when you see it, please be sure to. I would acknowledge it. I'll acknowledge it after you do, but I want you to acknowledge it first.
I'm trying to. Oh yes, thank you, Sal Patchy, or Packy. Is it Patchy or Packy, Joe?
I would say if it's CI, it's a chi, so it's patchy.
Yes.
But
Okay.
he might have other, he may pronounce it differently, which he certainly is entitled to.
Well, Sal, thank you so very, very much. We really appreciate. Don't we appreciate it, Mrs. Bundy? Mrs. Bundy says yes. Thank you very much to Sal.
Oh, God, yes.
Hmm.
So anyhow, I'm almost there. Hold on. I'm just, when I'm running the show, everything runs slow, and so it just takes me a little longer to move some frames around. There we go. This is a perfect picture. There it is, Joe. Uncle Arthur is now with us. So I think I'm going to keep Uncle Arthur around. Whenever we get a surprise, we'll have Uncle Arthur. Which, by the way, for those of you who were too young, okay, he was Uncle Arthur on Bewitched. So just to make that clear. So
it just came up on my.
and he would just show up in the oddest ways, and only Paul Lynde could pull it off. Sammy Presley hitting super chat. Thank you, Sammy. So yeah, you're right, Joe. I mean, with all the weather stuff we do, we get so highly technical. We need to have we need to have a little bit of levity and some fun, and this is how we do it because Joe and I, among the older folks who recognize some of these movies and TV shows. This was the world that we grew up in, and it brings back fond memories. So we'll just keep popping them up. So there you go. Mrs. Bundy and Uncle Arthur. Carol Merrill, by the way, is around somewhere here. So if we're gonna do this, where
I'm
is
beginning
she?
to feel like this is like the Brady Bunch. We're getting boxes here.
Hang on, I got Carol here somewhere. Here it is. Hold on. Oh, it's a Sunday. I'm moving at a snail's pace. Nope, that's Alan Casper. I
Oh
gotta
dear.
I gotta find Carol. Where is she? Carol.
Well, I
Who?
tell you, we could use Alan Casper on New York television right now. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah.
that, and that picture of Alan was, probably back in the '70s when they had those gigunda plexiglass maps that broke into 3 different places, and the controller must have been like 12 inches long.
All right. Now there's Carol. So we'll put Carol up over here. Let's get Alan back.
I agree. I agree with Leon Pravitsky. Alan was the best.
So we'll get there. He is. He actually has 2 pictures. He has a slideshow that I. There you go. Oh, I have to get you on this. No, you're there. So there's Mrs. Bundy. There's Paul. So we'll see. We've got some room to add a few. I know once we had Alice up there from the Brady Bunch, but I kind of lost her, so I don't know what I did with her. But there you go. So we're having fun here, which is really what this show is all about. Because trust me, folks, if I tell you, well, I won't speak for Joe, but I know he'll agree with me. I can tell you from my standpoint, if I wasn't having a good time doing this, I wouldn't be doing it. And this is my day. I have a great time doing it and enjoy it, especially when weather is active. So, uh, Joe, are you on the same page with me?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You need to do this. Like I said, there's some I've watched other people doing their own programs on weather, and they're good. They certainly know their stuff. But after a while, you say, "All right, so much for that." You need things like this to break the monotony. And and Alan. We used to wait on Alan. That was what we used to do. We used to wait for him to come on CBS2 because we knew that he knew his stuff. He was looking at all the information, and he was very serious, Joe. I mean, if you called Alan Casper up and he could readily read you, if he realized that you didn't know what that, hello, Mr. Casper, can you tell me what it's going to be like a week? He would hang up on you. He didn't want any part of you.
Right. Yeah. I was witness to that. Not that he did it to me. He didn't do it to me because he and I, we've been friends for very close friends for the last 40 plus years. So no, he never did that to me. But I
That is true.
I saw him do it to a few people.
I used to hang out with his colleague Joe Whitty at Channel 2. And one night, Joe left for dinner, and I said, "Can I hang out and wait for Alan Casper because I really want to meet him?" And he said, "Sure, no problem." And so I'm sitting there. Casper walks in. He sees me in the weather office. He says, "Hello." And I said, "I always wanted to meet you." And you know what he did? He said, "Well, thank you very much. Now, I'd like, could you leave right now? I work alone." And he like gently shoved me out the door, closed the door on me. I said, "What the hell was that all about?" But that was Alan. Yeah.
Yeah, to be in the right mood. Some days was in the right mood, and some days he's not. Just like all of us. Some days we other things go on in our lives, and you might be feeling happy, or you might be feeling aggravated, and maybe he had a bad day that day.
Well, but I think about it, and the more I think about it, the more it's true, or whatever like that. The majority of the people you see doing the weather on television are hand-fed that information by somebody else. Like they're getting the information that's the official AccuWeather forecast, for example, or somebody who's in front of the camera has been given it to them by somebody who's working behind the scenes and giving the discussion to that person behind the scenes. There are very few people now that actually do everything. The forecast, the graphics, everything. I mean, Alan was one of those people. I know Nick Gregory is another example. I think he may be the only example. You could tell when somebody has actually, done the research and done the forecast, as opposed to somebody who has had it hand fed to them or done for them, and all they are doing is just being a warm body in front of the camera. I know they at News 12 Westchester. I don't know about you, Joe. They say, "Oh, we want you to have an intern, and we want you to do." Wait a minute. What's Alice doing up there?
I found her. I have her saved on my hard drive. So I found her.
I'm getting back to what I was saying. I said I don't need an intern to make up my maps for me or to put together a forecast. I want to do it all if I'm going to go out in front of that camera. And I know you feel the same way, Joe. If I'm going to be standing out there and talking for 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, I want what I'm saying to be emanating from up here, from my mind, from my brain. It's my forecast. It's not somebody else's forecast that has been given to me or whatever. And that's how I felt. I think that came through because a lot of people in the aftermath we believed you. We listened to you. When you talked on the air. You were talking to us. You weren't talking to a broad audience. It seemed like you were talking to me one-on-one. And that's something I think has been lost on the local airwaves now. And when I see Alan, my God, all of us, when we were in college, we would like bow down to Alan because Alan knew what he was talking about. Alan was the first one to introduce the LFM, the limited fine mesh model, on television. He said it's making its New York television debut, and he was explaining to his audience what all of those squiggly lines meant and what this meant in terms of the potential for a major storm. I know Dr. Frank Field used to get his forecast directly from the Weather Service because back in the day, the Weather Service was at 30 Rock, which is where Channel 4 was. And so Frank Field would just walk down the hall, talk to one of the meteorologists. The meteorologist would give him all the information. Then Frank Field would stand in front of the camera and say, "And here's what we're going for." But Alan did it all on his own. He was great.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed having interns. And what I used to do, Joe, is that after getting them in for a few days, depending on how much they, if they had how much weather exposure that they had from school, I would just get them involved in the forecast process with me, and we would do it together, and we would do the graphics together, and so on. So I really enjoyed having interns, and I'm very. That was the one thing I will always uh, distinguish myself differently from a few professional weather people who shall go nameless. When I was, in college, that I made it a point to extend my hand and help anyone I could, uh, not only you know, in the work environment, but afterward, when they were in their job search, when they needed advice, when they needed to, figure out what they should or shouldn't do, or et cetera, et cetera. My door was always open, and still is for that matter, because I still get calls from time to time from people that I've worked with over the years that are younger than me and trying to figure out where to go. I have always had an open door. You can call me at any time. Of course, now these days, just message me anytime, and then we can get on the phone and have a conversation. Um, and
Maybe you
I'm
were
proud.
luckier than
A lot of the folks that both a lot of the folks that I encountered went on to bigger and better things than I did, and I was thrilled about that, because you know I gave them a push.
Well,
I'm not.
maybe you were lucky. You were luckier than I, because the people who I ended up getting at News 12, I mean, eventually they just said, "Look, you got to have an intern." The people were being besieged by a number of people who want to get, but the people who I got basically were just doing it for only one reason: to get extra credit, and were more interested in just getting the credit. I never got anyone who was like you and I, who were weather nuts from the time we were very young.
Oh, that's
And
all.
storms,
Almost all of them for me were. I mean,
yeah,
I got people, I got people that's what they wanted to do with their lives. It wasn't they weren't doing it for extra credit or anything along those lines. It was always, television / weather related. And
right, right. And
like
there's
I
only
said,
one exception. One exception is a young lady. Her name was Katie Towie, and she when on her form she says, I always from when I was very young, I always watched Joe Rayo, and after I'd watched Joe Rayo, I'd go into the bathroom, stand in front of the mirror, and make believe I was Katie the weather girl presenting the weather on television. And I'm very proud to say I had Katie as an intern, and she is now Dr. Katie Towie. She went all the way with research in meteorology. She actually went, Joe, to City College, where we went to on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, got her degree, got her PhD, and is now into research. She is not a TV personality. She is not into that, but she went all the way to the top in terms of weather research. And I can always say now that at least one of my interns got one of those advanced degrees, something that I never certainly could get. But she was very, very good, and she was the only one really that did show any indication or inclination that she was interested in weather forecasting per se. All the others, they were there and they would just sit there and just like watch as I'm typing. I try to show them how to work the weather producer, the WSI weather producer. And most of them were like so befuddled, like, what did I do? How did I do this or whatever? So you were lucky. You got more of those, down in the grain weather weenies, so to speak. They didn't seem to find their way to where I was, though. They just again was in there just to get the extra credit for college.
yep. Ah, those were the days. Okay, so it's 12:05. I have no rant. So you ranted today, so you actually did the Sunday morning rant, but I got to save this screen somehow. So that's I like this, but I got a few extra spaces. So even Omni gets its sponsorship staying there with all these great
Alan
stars from the past.
and Alice
Right, and Mrs.
and, and
Mrs.
Paul, yeah,
Mrs.
Mrs.
Bundy,
Bundy.
You got to point the other way to Mrs. Bundy. You have to point in the opposite. She's right
that
next
point,
to you.
Oh, you mean in that direction?
Yeah. That
In that
now,
direction.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, Mrs.
Yeah.
Bundy. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much for being here on this Sunday. Hope you enjoyed the show. And this was not planned, so uh, that's one
And
thing.
we have 83 likes. 83 likes, Joe. 17 away from 100.
Do we shoot for 100? Can we get 100?
Can we get 100? That's a gentle hint,
I'm
folks.
trying to think of who else. Because I got room for maybe a couple more. Uh, a couple of more big cheeses on here. Who? Any ideas?
Well, somebody on the chat board mentioned that in 25 days, the living legend of TV weather in New York, Frank Field, is going to turn 100 years old. Believe it or not.
Oh,
Unbelievable.
I could get a picture of Frank. I'll
Yeah.
work on that. Any other ideas?
No, not off the top of my head. John Charles says Jim Jensen used to give. I guess he's referring to Alan Casper. Used to give him. Yeah, I'm having a problem with the chat board. It jumps when I try to scroll down. It's jumping, so I
Yeah,
can't.
it's a bit of a weird day today, so
Yeah.
it might be a YouTube issue because I'm seeing the same thing here on my big screen.
Jim Jensen sometimes would give Alan the hard time, but that's only because Alan. Did Jim Jensen? You remember? Had a softball team, the CBS All Stars, and one time it was unusually balmy in March. And Alan Casper asked Jim Jensen, "Did you play a little practice round today?" And Jim Jensen said, "We actually had a game today." And Alan said, "Have you ever noticed that it's getting harder
Right.
it's getting harder to play as you're getting older?"
Yeah, I think Jensen came back with it's going to get something to the effect of it's going to get a lot hotter and harder for you for a minute.
Joe, we hit 101. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
and thank you again. Thank you again to Sammy Presley, Anthony Sparacchio, Sal Pacci, especially Sal, Raymond O'Hara, Jason Kaplan, David Schwartz, Robert Russo, Bogies Bees, Trish Sparacchio, Ken Musillo, and Paul Roman, and anybody else. If I missed out, I'm sorry, but we all appreciate all of the super chat hits today on Joe and Joe, and we'll see you tomorrow night, Joe.
Lately they've been impressive. I have to say, you guys are all must be hitting lottery tickets or something. But
yeah,
thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing it with us. Really, in all seriousness, thank you. It does go a long way. This is I don't want to say it's how we earn our living, but it's nice.
It helps.
It helps, and we can pay a few bills. I can get a few cigars. I can get myself a bottle of wine every once in a while, and we thank you very, very much indeed. 103 likes. Thank you for those of you who hit the like button. Joe and I will be back tomorrow night at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time. The European model begins in 40 minutes, and we won't be here for that. So we'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.